When the crane arrived, they found me still very scared. And while I was locking my car, one of the guys came up to me and said, "You were lucky. 3 cars have already gone off the road at that spot. They say the witches gather there, where there used to be an old chapel that burned down." My name is Ricardo, and I'm originally from Ensenada, Baja California. What I'm about to tell you happened to me a little over a year ago, on one of those nights you never forget, no matter how hard you try. And believe me, I have tried. Perhaps telling it here is another step in that direction. I work at a restaurant that opened just last year on Adolfo Lopez Mateos Avenue. It was our first week open, and business had been surprisingly good, so the owner wanted to get together after our shift. We closed up, got some beers, and stayed up chatting. When I realized it was almost 3 a.m. I live further south, about a half-hour walk. I had spent what little money I had, so I decided to walk. The night was cool, and the pavement had a strange sheen under the streetlights from the recent rain. So I walked along Lopez Mateos, heading down towards the less crowded area. And when I reached the bridge over the stream, that's when I heard the sound of the water. At first I didn't think much of it, but as I got closer, I realized the canal, which is almost dry most of the time, had a really strong current. The noise of the water was so loud it drowned out everything else. I leaned against the railing and peered over. The reflection of the yellow lights on the lamppost broke on the current, creating shimmering patterns that seemed to move with a life of their own. But just as I was about to continue on my way, something moved down there. I thought it was a sack or a log, but the bundle righted itself. It was a tall, slender figure with long, black hair plastered to its face. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but it was moving against the current. The water was flowing out to sea, but this thing was moving inland as if nothing could stop it. I froze. When it raised its head to see me, I knew it wasn't human. Its face was completely deformed, with eyes where its mouth should have been, and its mouth open as if stretched to the very edge of its skin. From that opening emerged a long, grayish tongue that moved slowly. The body seemed to float more than walk. I stumbled backward on the sidewalk. The figure began to move faster. I didn't hear footsteps or splashing, but I felt its presence approaching. I felt it because I began to feel short of breath. I ran off the bridge without looking back. I ran until I reached a larger avenue where there were still some taxis parked. One of the drivers, a big man, saw me and got out immediately when he saw how pale I was. He asked me if I had been mugged. I told him what I had seen, still trembling. I told him I had seen something under the bridge. The taxi driver listened calmly. When I finished, he said, "You're not the first to see something there. When the canal fills, the sea returns some of what it took." He offered me a cigarette, told me to sit in the taxi, and waited until I calmed down. Then he insisted on taking me home and refused to charge me. It doesn't rain much, but when it does, I avoid crossing that bridge. I feel like if I ever see that thing again, it will be on a night like that. Whenever I pass by there, I get the urge to look down. I think about what the taxi driver told me, about the sea returning which should never have left it. Hello, I'm writing to you from Zacatecas. What I'm about to tell you happened several years ago when I was still living with my grandparents on a small ranch on the outskirts of Betagre. The house was at the foot of a hill in an area full of abandoned mines. Since I was little, my grandmother said that the little ones lived in those caves and that they got angry if you disturbed their territory. I thought they were just stories. But one afternoon in March, they left me alone. My grandfather had gone to town, and my grandmother was at Mass. The sun was already setting, and I started sweeping the dirt patio. The air was cold. That's when I started hearing dry metallic tapping sounds, like someone was hammering something right under the ground. It was rhythmic, coming from the area of an old well covered with large stones. I was curious, but scared, so I went back inside and closed the door. About half an hour passed. While I was heating coffee on the stove, I heard another noise. This time, it was a very thin, repetitive whistling, like a clumsy, broken melody, as if someone were trying to imitate a song and didn't know how to continue. When I looked out the window, something was moving among the mesquite trees. They were 3 small figures, about the size of a child, but with twisted legs and long arms. Their faces were blurry. One of them was holding something that shone like a stone or a piece of metal. And then I heard the same whistling, now closer. The figures began to walk toward the house slowly, crookedly, almost dragging their feet. I closed all the windows and hid behind the table. For a moment I thought they were gone, but then I heard a sharp thud at the door, and then another, and another, until the sound changed, as if someone were scratching the wood from below. I don't know how, but I gathered my courage and looked through the crack at the bottom of the door. What I saw haunts me to this day. A small, thin hand with long black nails was reaching from under the door, moving as if searching for a crack to enter. I screamed. I ran to my grandmother's room and locked myself in until I heard her voice outside late that night. When she found me, I told her everything, crying. I begged her to believe me, but she wasn't surprised. She lit a candle and said softly, "I told you, they're not bad if you respect them, but don't look at them when they come out. Never look at them because that makes them angry. That's why they become blurry." The next day, my grandfather and I found the ground disturbed by the covered well. Among the stones, we saw an old blackened coin with an engraving neither of us recognized. My grandmother wrapped it in a handkerchief and put it away. We never spoke of it again. No matter how hard I try to forget when I'm awake, it's different in my dreams. Even when I'm dreaming about something else, I hear them. I hear that discordant short melody coming from beneath the earth. This story was told to me by a taxi driver named Eusebio when he worked in Oaxaca. One early morning he told me, "You know what? There are things only those of us who drive at night see." Eusebio worked nights. One ordinary early morning around 2:30, he dropped off a customer in a neighborhood in the upper part of the city, where the streets are steep with old houses. He realized he had taken a wrong turn onto a dead-end street that overlooked a ravine. As he tried to turn around, something caught his attention. On the side of the street a few meters from the end, a group of 4 women were gathered around a bonfire. They had their backs to him, murmuring something, their long hair loose. He slowed down, curious. It was then that one of the women raised her head. He saw that she had a pale face that didn't reflect the firelight. It had no eyebrows, and its mouth moved silently. The other women turned at the same time. What he saw next froze him. Their shadows didn't match their bodies. While the women remained still, the shadows moved on their own, twisting and walking in different directions, as if they had a life of their own. Eusebio put the car in gear to leave, but he heard a thump on the roof of the taxi. He looked in the rearview mirror. One of the women was no longer in the group. He saw her walking slowly behind the taxi, but with each step she seemed to be getting much faster, without moving her feet. He accelerated, but the car wasn't responding. The speedometer climbed, but the scenery didn't change. It was as if he was trapped on that street. Suddenly, the taxi radio turned on by itself. There was no music, just a man's voice singing in an unfamiliar language. And in the middle of that noise, he heard clear, soft voices saying, "Don't run. Don't take anything from us. You'll come back." The fear was so great he let go of the steering wheel. That's when the car jerked forward, mounted the sidewalk, and crashed into a pole. The impact snapped him out of his trance. No one came out to see the crash. In the distance, he saw no fire, no women, but the smell of a dying fire filled his nostrils. He called for a crane. When it arrived just before dawn, the mechanic said to him, "You were lucky, boss. In that neighborhood, 3 drivers have already gone off the road. They say the witches gather there, right around the bend, where an old chapel used to burn down." Eusebio eventually went back to working nights, but he never went to that area again. Good evening. I'm Armando from Durango. Several years ago, I worked as a night watchman at a truck repair shop on the outskirts of the city. The first night, the caretaker explained the routine and ended with a strange warning. If you hear a dog at night, but don't see it, don't go out. Close the door and pretend to be asleep. We forgot about it until our third night, around 3 a.m., when we heard something walking outside. Then we heard a slow, deliberate bark, followed by the footsteps of a very large animal sniffing at our door. We remembered the warning, closed the door tightly, and pretended to be asleep. The noise lasted a while, and then left. The next day, a stray dog appeared, thin, dusty, and fearful. I left it food. The manager saw it and said, "No, don't think that's the one you heard last night. But if this one comes near, let him stay. Maybe this one will teach you why we shouldn't pay any attention to what's lurking around here." The little dog stayed. We named him Miguel and let him sleep inside. He would lie in front of the door as if on guard. One early morning, when the wind was blowing hard, the deep, heavy sound returned. Miguel jumped up, bristling, and stood trembling in front of the door. Suddenly, we heard something large fall on the roof. The metal sheets rattled. Miguel began to grunt softly. Right above us, we heard something walking slowly, almost dragging its feet all night. The caretaker arrived at dawn and found us pale. He just said, "Didn't anything else happen to you just because this dog wouldn't leave you alone?" Well, if it had, maybe you would have seen what was making the noises. Those visits became constant, but every night Miguel would stand guard. Then one day, Miguel went blind. The caretaker said, "Sometimes that happens to dogs that stare at a ghost, or worse. A blind dog means it had the evil one's eyes, which also means that the evil left." From that day on, we never heard the sounds again. When I left that job 2 years later, I took Miguel with me. He lived with me until he died. Every night until his last breath, he slept in front of the front door. That's where we found him the day he died. Until the end, he tried to protect us. Of course. Here are 3 new original horror stories written in the same atmospheric first-person narrative style, drawing on themes of urban legends, nocturnal encounters, and folkloric dread. I used to clean offices downtown, the graveyard shift, midnight to 6. The pay was decent, and I liked the silence of the empty buildings. The Paramount Tower was my regular, 20 floors of glass and cold marble. My routine was always the same: start at the top, work my way down with my cart. The restrooms on the 17th floor were always the worst, not dirty, just cold. And there was this one stall, the last one by the window, that always had its door closed. Not locked, just latched. My first week I knocked. No answer. I slid the latch open with my pen. Empty. Just the toilet and the view of the city lights. I started just leaving it. But then I noticed things. The seat would be down when I knew I'd left it up. A single damp footprint on the tile, the smell of ozone and wet soil, out of place in the sterile, recycled air. I mentioned it to the day shift security guard, an old-timer named Walt. He just shook his head, stirring his coffee. "Don't open that one," he said, not looking at me. "Just wipe down the outside and move on. Some doors stay closed for a reason." I tried, but the curiosity ate at me. What was the reason? One night, around 3 a.m., I heard it, a low, rhythmic sound from behind the stall door. Not crying, humming. A tuneless, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate in my teeth. The cart's wheels squeaked as I backed away. The humming stopped. The stall door unlatched itself with a soft click and swung inward, just an inch. The darkness inside was absolute, deeper than the room's shadows. I didn't clean the 17th floor for a week, made excuses. But last night my boss checked the logs. The sensors said no one had serviced that restroom. I had to go back. It was quieter than ever. My reflection in the dark window looked like a ghost. I worked fast, avoiding looking at the last stall. As I was about to leave, the faucet at the far sink turned on by itself. The water ran brown, then clear. I went to turn it off. In the mirror's reflection, I saw the stall door was wide open. It wasn't empty anymore. A man sat on the closed toilet lid in a suit that looked decades out of style. He was perfectly still, facing the wall. The humming was back, softer now. I couldn't move. Slowly in the mirror, his head began to turn toward my reflection. Not his body, just his head, rotating like a broken owl's. His face was smooth, featureless, like polished clay. He spoke, but the sound didn't come from him. It came from the walls, the vents, inside my own head. "You're always so thorough. You didn't forget me." I ran. I left the cart, my keys, everything. I called Walt from the lobby, my hands shaking. He sighed, a long, tired sound. He was a broker. Jumped from that window in '87. They found him, but he never really left his favorite thinking spot. He likes the company. Walt paused. "He'll wait for you now. He knows your schedule." I quit this morning. But tonight, at 3 a.m., the faucet in my apartment bathroom turned on by itself. The water was ice cold, and from the drain, I heard the faint, familiar sound of humming. Driving the long haul through the desert, you see things, mirages mostly. But some things are real. There's a stretch on Route 86, about 50 miles from the nearest town where people leave things. Not a formal rest stop, just a wide patch of gravel with a single gnarled Joshua tree. Tied to its branches are ribbons, photos, baby toys, and weathered notes sealed in plastic. Truckers call it the weeping tree. The story is, decades ago, a family station wagon broke down there in a July heat wave. They didn't make it. Now, if your car fails near that spot, you're supposed to leave something of value, an offering, for safe passage. I never believed it, until my radiator hose blew right in front of it. The sun was a hammer. My phone had no signal. As I stood there, steam hissing from the hood, the silence pressed in. That's when I noticed the items weren't just weathered, they were perfectly preserved. A brightly colored plastic ring looked brand new. A Polaroid photo showed no sun bleaching. In the dead, dry air, it was wrong. I had a lucky poker chip in my glove box. Almost as a joke, I walked to the tree. The ground felt soft, like ash. I tied the chip to a branch. The moment I let go, a cold gust of wind ripped through the still afternoon, spinning the trinkets. A whisper, like many children sighing at once, brushed past my ear. My skin crawled. I hurried back to the truck just to wait. An hour later, an old tow truck appeared, as if from the heat haze itself. The driver, a man with deep-set eyes, didn't speak. He hooked up my rig and gestured for me to get in. We drove in silence for 20 minutes before he said, "You left something." It wasn't a question. "A chip," I said. He nodded. "Good. It's always the ones who take something who don't make it to town." I froze. "Take something?" "The family didn't die of thirst," he said, staring at the road. "They were offered help. They took water, food, a ride, but they never offered anything back. You can't take from that place without giving something first. The tree remembers." He dropped me at a garage. My truck was fixed by sunset. As I drove back east, I passed the tree at dusk. In my headlights, for a second, the shapes tied to the branches didn't look like trinkets. They looked like grasping, tiny hands. I keep a roll of quarters in my cup holder now, just in case I break down again. I'll always have something to give. I inherited my grandmother's old row house. It had a separate basement entrance, a door under the porch stairs leading to a small, self-contained apartment. "Never rent it out," she told me on her deathbed, her grip surprisingly strong. "That space is occupied. We made an arrangement a long time ago." I needed the income. I cleaned it out. It was just one room with a bathroom, dusty but dry. I listed it online. The first applicant was Mr. Alva. Soft-spoken, pale, he worked nights in logistics. He paid 6 months' rent in crisp cash and asked for one thing: a 7-day candle, unscented, to be placed on the windowsill and never allowed to go out. A strange but easy request. The problem started with the delivery people. They'd leave packages at the top of the stairs, refusing to go down to his door. Mail carriers would mark his mail undeliverable. My dog, a brave shepherd mix, would whine and back away from the top of the basement steps, hair on end. Then came the sounds. Not loud, the subtle drag of furniture at 3 a.m. A low, conversational murmur with no discernible words, like listening to a radio through a wall. And the cold, a perpetual winter chill would seep from under his door, even in August. One night, the candle went out. A power flicker, perhaps. At exactly 2:07 a.m., my bedroom door creaked open. Mr. Alva stood in the hallway, illuminated by the streetlight. He wasn't pale anymore. His skin had a gray, waxen texture. "The light went out," he said, his voice dry as fallen leaves. "I need to borrow a match." Terrified, I pointed to the kitchen. He glided, didn't walk, to the drawer and took a book of matches. As he turned, the shadow he cast on the wall wasn't his. It was taller, gaunt, with elongated fingers. "The arrangement must be maintained," he said, and was gone. The next day, I dug through my grandmother's papers. I found a brittle lease agreement from 1952. The tenant's name was different, but the terms were the same: a nominal rent and the provision of perpetual light. A note in her handwriting read, "He was here before the house. We built over his place. The light is the rent. The light keeps him in his shape, If it goes out, he forgets what he is. I don't collect his rent anymore. I buy the candles in bulk. I hear him down there, moving in the dark behind his door. Sometimes I hear two voices murmuring. The second one is new. It's my grandmother's. I think she came back to renegotiate the terms. Last night, a second candle appeared on my own windowsill. I haven't blown it out. I don't dare.